Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. Now, if you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of folk horror, and usually there'll be a new episode every Friday in which we review and discuss an iconic movie within this subgenre. But I couldn't miss this opportunity to give you a little bit of bonus content because this week sees the release of a brand new British folk horror. The movie is called DOGGED, and it's available on video on demand and DVD right now. The story surrounds a young boy who returns to his home, which is a sort of rural island just off the coast of Britain. And soon enough, he starts to discover that there's something more dark and sinister going on underneath the surface of this quaint little British town. It's got a lot of this kind of very folky trait, so a lot of people are talking about it within the context of this new folk horror revival that we seem to be in. Now, I got the chance to chat to its director, Richard Rowntree, and we sat down, talked about the film, about making the film, and about all things folk horror. Now, just so you know, this is a completely spoiler-free chat. You don't have to have seen the movie to listen to my interview with its director, so please feel free to carry on listening. And then, if you're curious about the movie, please do pick it up and give it a watch. So here is my chat with Richard Rowntree.
Islander?
Yep, born and raised.
Visiting your folks?
A funeral, actually.
Mum said Megan fell from the cliffs.
How sad that so young a person should lose her life in coming to the aid of a lowly animal.
Stop staring. We've been through enough already. Still don't know what she was doing out there, Father.
I signed the death certificate myself. A horrible business. Barely recognisable.
Sorry.
No, I am. I'm sorry you left me here.
This island is your family. What more would you need?
Okay, welcome to the podcast, Richard Rowntree. Richard, hello.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, first of all, just for people who don't know, tell me a little bit about DOGGED, about the story, what people can expect from this film.
Sure, so it's a folk horror movie, kind of a throwback to the sort of 60s and 70s heyday of the film, in that it's very slow moving and very character driven. The story is about a young man called Sam who goes home to a tidal island where he was brought up to attend the funeral of an 11-year-old girl who's apparently fallen from the cliffs and died, and when he gets there he kind of discovers that there's a bit more to it than that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So tell me a little bit about how this film sort of started out its life, because it started off as a short, is that right? And it's kind of evolved from there.
Yeah, so it started off as a micro short, and we actually made it for a BBC Three show called The Fear, which was kind of a X Factor kind of thing for short horror films. Yeah. And we ended up doing really well on that and got some really positive reviews. So we entered it into some festivals and kind of discovered that there was a real appetite for folk horror, and is one that Matt Davies, who wrote it with me, and I very familiar with and you know, lovers of, and so we kind of sat down and started thrashing it out, and I think about a year and some later we kind of had a feature script and decided we were just going to go for it.
It's amazing. Did you ever think when you were making the short film that, oh, you know, this story has the potential to be fleshed out to something? Was it ever a thought?
Yeah, I mean, we always, you know, maybe not when you're writing, but when we were shooting, certainly, you know, and it's not always necessarily just us, you know, other people in the cast and crew have their inputs, you know, about, certainly with actors, you know, oh, I've got an idea for the backstory of this character, and so that helps you kind of inform your decisions when you're going to write the feature script.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me, because you've previously worked in sort of the art department side of things, haven't you, on a number of huge films, Star Wars and the recent Jurassic World movie, Ex Machina, is that right? Loads and loads of amazing projects. How that must have kind of really helped, I suppose, with your sort of directorial eye, because I thought the film sort of, it looks stunning, and there's a real kind of emphasis on the landscape and the sort of colour scheme and that kind of thing. I mean, I suppose a lot of that experience must have helped, did it?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I'm a real believer in the idea that film is kind of a visual storytelling medium, and so I try to limit the dialogue where possible and tell the story as much as you can through the pictures. So yeah it's
And the movie was funded through Kickstarter, wasn't it?
It was
incredible.
Yeah.
And you know how when you've got you hear about a lot of people that they talk about when you work on a low budget movie, sometimes those restrictions can kind of help. It can kind of breed that creativity in the same way as kind of restricting. How did it kind of affect you working on a feature film rather than a short with a kind of limited budget?
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of we had in mind when we wrote it that we weren't going to have a huge amount of money to make it. So obviously, we kind of reined in ideas. You can't have trains running off tracks. Not that there would be anyway, but big explosions and things like that. So we were kind of fairly limited. And then when we raised the money through Kickstarter, we the four of us producers ended up putting some of our own money in as well towards the end when the Kickstarter money had run out. But we it exactly like you said, it breeds creativity because and people really want to help out as well when they know that kind of you're working with such a low budget. You get all kinds of offers. I can't give you any money, but I can help with this, or I can lend you a lighting kit, or things like that. So it's it helps when people know that you're doing it for the right reasons, and it's because you want to make a film rather than you've got into the industry because you want to make money or anything like that, which I think is kind of a curse that suffers the British film industry.
Definitely. What's it like when you're sort of in charge of a big feature film like this, and a whole crew of actors, and is it hard to prioritise? Should I be thinking technically about these shots? Should I be thinking about the performances? And kind of balancing all those elements.
Yeah, I mean, I largely we were kind of stupidly naive in a lot of ways with this film. We've got 22 principal cast, and we were at locations all over the southeast of England.
It's quite vast, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it was, we were kind of thinking really big, and that helped in one way because everybody upped their game to kind of meet the expectations. But I mean, you just have to prioritise, like you say. So, there was a lot of pre-production where, everything was storyboarded. I'm a terrible artist, but, it was stickmen. But, everybody kind of knew what they were doing when we got on set every day. So that kind of speeds the process up and helps things along. And it can be quite dangerous as well, I think, to storyboard when you're, doing such a low budget feature, because, you can get to a location and suddenly they can say, oh, you can't go in this room, or you can't do this. So, you have to be able to think on your feet a little bit as well. So you can't be too set in stone, but as long as you've got the idea of what part of the story you're telling visually, then, you can kind of adapt.
And as you were saying, it's kind of in sort of pacing wise, it harks back to sort of some of the older sort of folk horrors from the 60s and 70s. But were you ever worried or concerned about it? About should we be pacing this up? Should we add a scare in at this point or anything like that?
Yeah, not really is the honest answer. I mean, when we set out to make the film, our primary goal was to make a film that we would want to watch ourselves as an audience, and I think that is largely forgotten in the films that get greenlit, everywhere. And so as long as we were satisfied with it at the end, we were going to be happy. And the fact that it got such a positive reaction from festivals and audiences and reviewers and everything else has just been a massive bonus for us.
I want to ask you then a bit about folk horror, and like you say, people seem to be quite excited about folk horror again at the moment, and we've been talking about it quite a lot in the last few weeks on this podcast. And how is it? Everyone kind of has their own interpretation really of what folk horror is. How would you describe what folk horror is?
Well, there's a writer actually, a guy called Howard, who is writing a book on it at the moment, and he funded his book through Kickstarter as well, and I kind of connected with him on Twitter and Facebook, and he kind of has these kind of three set points laid out where it's kind of a combination of the uncanny and the prosaic, and that there must be a summoning of some sort within the film, and he explains it far better than I can. But yeah, I think that from a visual kind of viewpoint, as long as you can make the landscape one of the characters and one of the threats within the film, largely for me, and then add in some kind of either pagan or satanic element, then you've got the groundings of a good folk horror.
Yeah, definitely. And it feels like a folk horror often is shot out and about on location outside. No, you don't often find a lot of folk horrors, or at least they don't appear to be shot on kind of sound stages or anything like that. If you had had the chance, if you'd had more money, would you have used studio spaces, or was that sort of part of it to be sort of outdoors in the countryside?
No, I certainly would have done. I think anytime you're in an environment as a filmmaker where you can completely control that environment, lighting wise and everything else, you know, obviously you feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, you don't end up on set in the middle of your stone circle where it suddenly starts to rain and everybody has to run under the gazebo kind of thing. But no, it was a lot of fun, and we were really kind of keen on the idea of not making it an anti-horror, but, you know, making the threat within the film in the daylight largely, and kind of sticking to those old folk horror principles when we were making it. And I think, unfortunately, because it's a kind of an underrepresented subgenre, a lot of audiences who would describe themselves as kind of avid horror fans aren't necessarily au fait with that, and they kind of get a little bit confused and maybe don't quite like it as much because it's daytime and that kind of
it
threat.
doesn't kind of have the sort of typical horror movie look or feel, does it, in a lot of ways?
No, exactly. I mean, I think and that's down to the fact, I think, that characters in those films, you know, when they're well written, they're not trying to hide from anything. You know, they're there, they believe what they're doing is right, they're out in the open, they don't need to hide it from anyone, so why not do it in the daytime?
Yeah, definitely. There's that kind of weird element of sort of the everyday, isn't there, to the horror? I think it's like, these are a bunch of people that live this way, and that is all there is to it, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, they sort of believe in what they're doing. So why is it, do you think, right now that we are having a bit of a moment with folk horror? Do you think there's any reason for that? Is that just trends, or is there anything more to it?
I don't know. On the whole, I mean, I think probably that there's an element of the kind of political culture that's going on in the last few years, of that kind of working class uprising almost, you know, that a lot of people feel swelling within them, and kind of a hatred towards the kind of way that things are being run, you know, to kind of benefit the few rather than many. And I hate to sound like Jeremy Corbyn, but I think, and that largely plays into the kind of folk horror thing, because folk horror, you know, generally focuses on an outsider who comes into an environment where everybody else is kind of knows what's going on and is, you know, normally well heeled, and you know, being that outsider and trying to break into that kind of circle of trust of the people who are in charge, I think, is something that kind of trickles down through it. So perhaps that's why.
Why do you think it is? Because as we said, you know, the kind of the language of folk horror is quite different to normal horror. You've not got sort of dark, creaky, you know, corridors or jump scares necessarily. What is it that makes folk horror scary for you, do you think?
Exactly what I said, really. For me, I mean, I kind of grew up in a small village, and largely like Sam, the character there, you know, you go away to university and you experience a whole different world and a larger world, and then when you come back to it, you know, they try and put you back into the box of where you've come out of, and you're not happy with it necessarily, and you know, your paranoia maybe starts to play a part there about, you know, do I belong here? So are you a fan of the sort of countryside now? I mean, or are you much more of a city person? I like probably quite a subtle blend of both at times. I mean, where I live is it's only 20 miles outside of London, but it's relatively rural still, and you know, I don't like the rat race as such, with lots of traffic and things, but
you've got the kind of perfect balance there then.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not far from London, but
nice. So what were the kind of main films that would you say that you took inspiration from for this? Because obviously you can see comparisons to movies like The Wicker Man and that kind of thing. Was that sort of a conscious
I mean,
inspiration?
Certainly, with things like shot choices and locations and you know, the grade and everything else, you know, we were very keen to kind of stick to an almost fairy tale esque kind of vibe with lots of greens and reds, and you know, having the cornfields in there is kind of, you're trying to pull in, you know, kind of traditional horror tropes into it to kind of engage audiences who might not necessarily be fans of folk horror. And you know, we do have scenes in there in the nighttime as well, and I mean, largely the kind of folk horror movies that Ben Wheatley has made recently, they were a really big boost, you know, when we were kind of in pre-production, sitting down and watching those and realizing that somebody as accomplished as him and who's as brilliant a director as him can kind of make that choice to just, I'm going to go out and make a folk horror movie, and you know, to hell with whether or not an audience like it. And you know, Kill List and Field in England were brilliant films, and I can rewatch them over and over again, and they're something very different out of the ordinary, and So yeah, that was a big encouragement for sure.
Yeah, he manages to weirdly sort of tap into something, and you don't know how he does it. How is it that those films manage to be quite as terrifying as they are, especially filmed in England? There's something so unnerving about it, isn't there?
Yeah, that really is.
How have you found it sort of since the movie, sort of showing it to audiences, that kind of thing?
The first time we showed it, it was really nerve-wracking, obviously, because I had no idea what people were going to think of it, and we had our cast and crew screening at Pinewood Studios. And it went down very well, but of course, you're slightly wary then, because everybody who's worked on it, they're not going to turn around and say, oh my God, I've wasted the last 6 months of my life. And we took it to some festivals, and I think the first one that we went to was over in Boston in Massachusetts, and we won Best Horror Feature, and Sam won Best Actor, and we were kind of blown away by it.
Incredible.
The kind of response to it, and we've ended up going to some pretty crazy places with it where we weren't quite sure if it was going to go down. We went to San Antonio in Texas.
Nice.
And the people there loved it. And we went to Buffalo in New York, and I had that was, the screening was in November or something, and a lady contacted me recently on Facebook and said, I can't stop thinking about your film. I think about it every day, and it's it's obviously such a boost as a filmmaker to know that even 10 minutes after it's finished, somebody's still thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. What are you kind of hoping? Again, for people listening to this who haven't seen the movie, what can they expect? What are you sort of hoping audiences are going to experience when they go and see this?
I mean, it's very much a movie, like all movies, I guess. This is a stupid thing to say, but it's one of those where you need to sit in the dark. Watch it, not lots of conversation going on, not lots of distractions around you. If you really focus on it, I think that we tried very hard to make the characters believable and full rounded characters. So if you kind of engage with that, then I think you will get a bit more out of it, and it will leave you afterwards thinking about certain elements of it. And I don't want to give the ending away, but there's something in there that will hopefully make people think.
Is there anything more in your, again, people talk about, is there a rise in folk horror right now because of things like the political situation, Brexit, this kind of weird, like, isolated Britain vibe? And again, people talk about films in all these kind of ways. Whether or not the filmmakers actually mean it is another thing. Yeah. And did you have anything like that in your head, bigger sort of messages or themes within the movie when making it?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the Brexit vote actually happened after we'd finished shooting, and I kind of started seeing parallels to it afterwards myself, but it wasn't intended, I'm sad to say. But no, yeah, I mean, certainly there's different things in there on different levels. There's kind of a storyline about it's a very gentle one about kind of incest and the implications that has on people, and particularly kind of parental relationships with their children. I mean, Sam's character has a very kind of difficult relationship with his father and a very close relationship with his mother, who kind of tries to protect him from his father, and that was something that we really wanted to play up in there, because I think it's something that's had a fairly big impact on the writing and us beforehand, both of us as writers. So there's lots of little Easter eggs in there, kind of little nuggets of things, homages to horror films that we love as well. So
love it. So tell me, what's your relationship like with the horror genre? I take it you're a horror fan, aren't you?
Yeah, huge. Yeah.
What was your kind of introduction to horror? Do you remember what sort of the first?
Yeah, I saw The Shining when I was 5 or 6 years old. It was on TV, and it was late one night, and I shouldn't have been awake anyway. But my mum let me sit up and watch it, and the atmosphere within that is something that I would always try and replicate, because I'm not a massive fan of kind of zombie movies or slasher movies or things like that. What I want when I watch a movie, any movie, whether it's horror or not, is to be left thinking about it afterwards, and that, so that's something that I try and do with my filmmaking. Yeah,
definitely. There's that kind of, it's more about the sort of dread and atmosphere, I suppose, isn't it? With things like The Shining. Do you have a favourite horror movie?
The Shining, probably.
It
still.
Is The Shining, yeah.
It's one of those ones where, every time it comes out in the local cinema, when they re-release it or show it for Halloween, I still always go along and buy a ticket, often on my own. But and another one that had a really big impact on me, completely different end of the scale, was about the same age. I watched Jaws.
Oh yeah, amazing.
And I was actually I had family living on the island of Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and it's very much like Amity Island. And my cousin, who was 10 years older than me or something, showed it to me when we were there on holiday in the summer, and I just refused to go in the sea after that. So, and I still really don't like it now.
Have you seen Hereditary yet?
I haven't. No, I'm waiting to go and see it
because that's definitely worth watching on the big screen, I think, as well.
I've heard really good things. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Great. So what's next for you then? I mean, obviously, have you got a taste for this now? Are you going to carry on kind of directing and making your own stuff, do you think?
Yeah, so we're 8 weeks away from starting shooting on our new film.
Amazing.
Which is another feature, and this one's called Nefarious. So somebody jokingly said to me, "Are you making a dictionary trilogy?" Where you have to explain the titles to people. But, so this one's very different, and it was kind of largely born out of about 6 months ago. The producers, we all sat down and kind of had a little bit of a debrief really about DOGGED, about what we would do differently next time and what areas we want to address, and we kind of decided, as I said earlier, that we'd kind of been quite naive in thinking, oh yeah, it's easy, we'll just knock out a feature film with 22 cast and all of this, and the figure that always staggers me about it is we had 72 individual costumes.
Wow, yeah,
for DOGGED, and I'm just like, it's unbelievable. And so we were like, yeah, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to do a home invasion movie because we can trap everybody in one location.
Oh, good plan.
Limited number of people. We're going to try and do things in the dark this time, so that it's kind of almost the polar opposite to DOGGED in a lot of ways, and a bit more gore this time
wonderful.
as well.
So you're staying in the horror genre then?
Yeah.
Excellent. So so home invasion movies are always scary, aren't they? There's something about them.
Yeah, I think we've tried to flip things up a little bit. I mean, I remember watching The Strangers for the first time.
Oh, God.
And the complete lack of motivation was what really freaked me out about it. The fact that they would just do it. And so we've tried to tell the story this time in a slightly different way, in that we're telling the story from the perspective of the people who are breaking into the house, and what happens when they get in there. So yeah, it sounds, I'm making it sound like a rip-off of Don't Breathe, but it's not.
No. I mean, everything can sound like a rip-off of something, can't it? That's the thing. And it's interesting, just quickly as well, the whole thing about the motivations and, how much information, were you ever thinking, how much information shall I give? How much could remain a mystery about these kind of stories that you write? Because again, there's something about it, I think, with horror. Look at The Shining, and a film as kind of opaque as that. Yeah. Does it add to the atmosphere, the scariness, I suppose, if you aren't given everything on a plate, I suppose?
Very much so. And I mean, particularly with The Shining, you've got kind of these random shots in there, like the guys in the animal masks.
God.
And you just kind of left thinking afterwards for years, and 35 years or whatever after I first saw it, I'm still wondering, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And to leave things like that and to purposely put them in there, I'm not saying I'm necessarily as obscure as that with certain things, but I think you're right. I think not knowing everything and particularly not seeing everything makes films a lot scarier.
Wonderful. All right, brilliant. Well, just for people who want to go out there and find DOGGED, where can they find it? Where can they go and see it?
So it's available on iTunes at the moment, and it will be on. It's on Amazon as well if you want the DVD. HMV, Zavi, kind of all those usual places. I think it's in store at HMV as well. So
brilliant, wonderful. Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And there we have it. A big thank you there to my guest, Richard Rowntree. So great to be able to chat to him about his new movie, DOGGED. Now, don't forget, DOGGED is available on all the usual on-demand places and on DVD and Blu-ray. So, if you like what you heard, if you're intrigued by the movie, grab yourself a copy and give it a watch. And let me know what you thought of the movie. Get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. I will also list Richard's details in the show notes in case you want to check him out on social media and find links to his other work. So join us again this Friday. Normal service will resume and we'll be back exploring the evolution of folk horror. And this week I'm going to be joined by the brilliant Freudian cinephile Mary Wilde to discuss folk horror from a more psychoanalytic angle. And then I'm going to be joined by Tom Burgess to discuss all things TV folk horror. And we're going to be covering, spoiler-free, a range of very weird 70s TV shows, including The Owl Service, Children of the Stones, Pender's Fen, and Robin Redbreast. So join us then for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.